The New York night was particularly cold that autumn, with a biting wind echoing through the streets. On the 27th floor of a luxurious building on Fifth Avenue, Benjamin Harrison, a real estate magnate, stared at the city skyline through the windows of his office. The view was spectacular, with the city lights twinkling like jewels in a dark sea. However, what once brought him satisfaction now felt empty, a premonition of what was to come. Benjamin had always been known for his relentless determination and an almost supernatural ability to turn any venture into gold. At 45, he had already achieved what many would consider the pinnacle of success. Luxury homes, sports cars, extravagant trips. He had everything money could buy. But what he didn't have, and perhaps never realized he needed, was the genuine respect of those around him. He was feared, but rarely admired. That night, however, would mark the beginning of a steep decline. An unexpected phone call came at 8:30 p.m. On the other end of the line, one of his key investors, John Miller, spoke with a tense voice. "Benjamin, we have a problem. The audit revealed serious financial discrepancies. The board is worried, and if we don't fix this quickly, we'll all be in trouble." Benjamin froze for a moment. Discrepancies? He had always been meticulous. How could something like this have gone unnoticed? With a mix of denial and anger, he abruptly ended the call and began reviewing the reports. However, the more he read, the more he realized the severity of the situation. Within days, financial scandals began erupting in the media. His company, once solid as a rock, was now on the brink of collapse. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Shareholders demanded answers, banks froze his assets, and he began losing everything he had built. Debts piled up, and the friends he thought he had disappeared, leaving him alone to face the consequences of his arrogance and lack of caution. The only person who remained in his life, almost like a shadow, was Clarice. She was his housekeeper, a humble-looking black woman in her 60s. Clarice had worked in Benjamin's home for over 20 years, always discreet and efficient, but completely ignored by him. To Benjamin, she was practically invisible, a piece of furniture that just fulfilled its function. However, when Benjamin lost his fortune and was forced to sell his properties, it was Clarice who stayed by his side, taking care of the house, preparing his meals, and offering silent support, even though he had never shown a shred of gratitude for all her years of loyal service. Clarice knew much more about Benjamin than he realized. She had witnessed his victories and his failures, his opulent parties and his lonely nights. And as he sank into despair, she watched, knowing that something bigger was at play. The day that marked Benjamin Harrison's total collapse was a Saturday. He was evicted from his last property, a mansion he loved almost as much as his own life. With a pale face and trembling hands, he was forced to watch as all his belongings were taken away. The few people who still cared enough to watch whispered from a distance, murmuring about how far the great man had fallen. With nowhere to go, Benjamin found himself forced to accept the only offer left to him, a small room in Clarice's house. She offered him the space without hesitation, and he, with no other options, accepted. The situation was humiliating, but he had no choice. In the first few days, Benjamin barely spoke. He spent most of his time locked in the room, refusing food and ignoring Clarice's attempts to comfort him. The pride that once sustained him was now destroying him. Clarice, for her part, continued her routine, never pressuring him or demanding anything in return. She knew that Benjamin's path to recovery would be long and painful, but she also knew he needed to go through it to learn lessons he had never been able to understand. One night, hearing Benjamin crying silently, Clarice decided it was time to act. She entered the room without knocking, carrying a tray with tea and some cookies. Benjamin, surprised, looked at her but said nothing. "Mr. Harrison, have some tea. It will help calm you down," she said, her voice soft and reassuring. He took the cup, more out of courtesy than desire, and held it with trembling hands. The silence between them was heavy, but Clarice was undeterred. "You know, Mr. Harrison, life has strange ways of teaching us what really matters. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to see things differently," she said as she poured the tea. Benjamin didn't respond immediately. He was exhausted, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. After a long sigh, he finally spoke. "I don't know who I am anymore, Clarice. Everything I was is gone." Clarice smiled, a smile full of wisdom accumulated over the years. "You are more than the money you had, and maybe it's time to discover that." This was the beginning of a series of conversations that would change Benjamin's life forever. Clarice, whom he had always underestimated, revealed herself to be an unexpected source of strength and wisdom. She began telling stories of her own life, of how she had overcome challenges that Benjamin couldn't even imagine. And slowly, he began to realize that true wealth wasn't in what he possessed, but in the people around him and the lessons life offered. Time passed, and the days in Clarice's house began to follow a strange but comforting routine. Benjamin, who had barely left his room before, now found himself spending more time in the kitchen with Clarice. She always had a story to tell, wise advice, or just a comforting silence. Little by little, he began to open his mind and realize there was much more to life than he had understood. One evening, as the soft crackle of the fireplace warmed the small room, Clarice began to tell a story that Benjamin never expected to hear. "Mr. Harrison, you know I've worked for your family for a long time, but I don't think you ever knew anything about my life before I came here," she began with a tone that suggested something important was coming. Benjamin, intrigued, nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I was born in the South, in a small town you've probably never heard of. My parents were humble workers, and from a very young age, I learned what sacrifice was. My mother always said the world was a hard place for people like us, poor and black. But she also said that strength came from our spirit, and that no one could take that from us." Benjamin was paying attention, but something in Clarice's voice suggested there was more to the story than it seemed. "When I was 20, I met a man. He was charismatic, full of dreams. We got married, and for a while I thought my life was settled. But fate had other plans. He got involved in shady business and ended up in prison. I was left alone with a daughter to raise." Benjamin's surprise was evident. He had never imagined Clarice had a daughter, let alone such a dramatic story. But Clarice didn't stop. "I knew I had to do something, so I decided to move north to try to make a life in New York. I left my daughter with my sister while I worked to send money to them. That's how I ended up in your family's home. I worked hard, saved every penny, and eventually managed to bring my daughter to live with me." Benjamin was impressed, but something still didn't add up. "Clarice, why have you never told me this before?" She looked him in the eye, her expression gentle but firm. "Because you never asked, Mr. Harrison. All these years, you were so focused on your own life that you never stopped to see beyond yourself. But now, maybe it's time to learn." Benjamin felt a twinge of shame, but also curiosity. "And where is your daughter now?" Clarice smiled, a smile full of pride. "My daughter grew up, studied, and today she's a successful lawyer. She lives in Chicago and has her own life. All of this was possible because, despite the difficulties, we never gave up. And that's why I'm here, Mr. Harrison, because I believe that with the right attitude, you can rise again too." Those words echoed deeply within Benjamin. He had never imagined that Clarice had gone through so much, and now he felt a genuine respect for her. For the first time in a long time, he began to think that perhaps there was a way out of the darkness he found himself in. As the weeks passed, Benjamin began to transform. Clarice's words resonated in his mind every day, and he began to see life from a different perspective. He knew that to rise again, he would need to abandon his pride and start over in a way he had never imagined. One morning, while having breakfast together, Benjamin decided to share his thoughts with Clarice. "Clarice, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I think it's time to do something about my situation. I can't keep sinking into self-pity." Clarice, who was watching him closely, nodded. "What do you have in mind, Mr. Harrison?" "I want to start over from scratch. But this time, I want to do it the right way. I want to help people. I want to do something that really makes a difference." Clarice smiled, satisfied. "That's a good start. But how do you plan to do that?" Benjamin hesitated for a moment, but soon found the courage to continue. "I want to create a foundation, an organization that helps people who are going through difficulties, like I am now. I want to use what I've learned in life to help others rise. And I want you to help me, Clarice. I couldn't do this without you. Clarice's surprise was evident, but she quickly regained her composure. I'm honored, Mr. Harrison, but are you sure you're ready for this? It's going to be a difficult journey. Benjamin smiled, with renewed determination in his eyes. I know it will be hard, but I'm ready. And this time, I want to do it not out of pride or ambition, but because it's the right thing to do. And so, the plan was set in motion. With Clarice's help, Benjamin began working on creating the foundation. They spent days and nights planning, discussing ideas, and looking for ways to fund the project. Clarice proved to be a valuable partner, with practical wisdom and an ability to see beyond appearances, something Benjamin was starting to appreciate more and more. As the project took shape, Benjamin began to feel something that had long disappeared from his life, a sense of purpose. He finally understood what Clarice had tried to teach him. True wealth wasn't in money or power, but in doing something meaningful, in helping others, and in being a positive force in the world. The small office where Benjamin's foundation began was modest, far from the luxurious skyscrapers he once occupied. It was a simple space, but filled with meaning. With Clarice by his side, he felt that he was finally on a path that made sense. They decided to name the organization the Hope Foundation, a tribute to Benjamin's newfound perspective on life. The foundation's mission was clear: to provide support and resources to people who, like him, had lost everything and needed a chance to start over. The first days were tough. Without the contacts and influence he once had, Benjamin had to learn to work with much less. He and Clarice visited underserved neighborhoods, talked to people facing hardships, and offered assistance where they could. What started with modest donations and volunteer work quickly gained the community's attention. Benjamin's story, a former tycoon now dedicating his life to helping those in need, began to circulate. Local newspapers published articles about his redemption, and before long, donors began to take an interest in the cause. What once seemed like a utopian idea started to transform into a respected organization with the capacity to make a real difference. During this time, Benjamin discovered something even more valuable than the foundation's successes. He began to see Clarice not just as his housekeeper, but as a friend, a counselor, and most importantly, a person he deeply respected. He began to recognize the strength and wisdom that had always been by his side, but that he had ignored for so long. In one of the rare moments of rest, while they talked in the small office, Benjamin decided to ask something that had been intriguing him for some time. Clarice, you've always known so much about life, about overcoming. How did you manage to keep your faith and strength, even when things were so hard? Clarice looked at him with a gaze that mixed tenderness and experience. Mr. Harrison, life isn't easy for anyone. We all face challenges, but what defines us is how we react to them. I learned early on that we can't control what happens, but we can control how we deal with it. You had to lose everything to learn that, but what matters is that you learned it. And now, you're doing something good with that knowledge. Benjamin nodded, feeling a deep gratitude for having her by his side. Over time, the foundation began to grow. More people joined the cause, and Benjamin found himself involved in something bigger than he could have imagined. However, success brought new challenges. The world of business and philanthropic donations wasn't so different from the corporate world Benjamin had left behind. Rivalries, internal politics, and growing expectations began to surface. The first major obstacle came when one of the foundation's most important donors, an influential businessman named Richard Thompson, demanded more control over how the funds were used. He wanted the foundation to focus on projects that improved his public image, something that went against the philosophy of Benjamin and Clarice. In a heated meeting, Richard confronted Benjamin. Harrison, you have to understand that this foundation only exists because people like me are willing to invest in it. If you don't follow my guidelines, you could lose everything again. Benjamin felt the old urge to give in to power and influence, but now, with Clarice by his side, he knew he couldn't betray the principles he had built. Richard, I appreciate everything you've done for the foundation, but I can't compromise our mission for personal interests. If that means losing your support, it's a risk I'm willing to take. Richard left the meeting furious, promising to withdraw all his financial support. The news was a devastating blow to the foundation, which relied heavily on Thompson's donations. Clarice, as always, was a voice of calm amid the chaos. "Don't worry, Mr. Harrison. We've lost a donor, but we haven't lost our mission. The important thing is to stay on the right path. If we do that, things will work out." Benjamin knew she was right, but the pressure was immense. He found himself on the edge of a new abyss, but this time, he was determined not to fall. In the days that followed, the foundation faced a financial crisis. They had to cut costs and reduce operations, but surprisingly, this only strengthened the commitment of volunteers and beneficiaries. The community, inspired by Benjamin and Clarice's sacrifice and dedication, began to rally around the foundation. Ordinary people started making small donations, and new donors, inspired by Benjamin's integrity, came forward. The foundation began to recover, but now with a more solid base and more genuine support. Benjamin realized that the true strength of the foundation wasn't in large donations, but in the support of people who believed in the cause. And that was a lesson he never would have learned without Clarice by his side. As the foundation stabilized, an unexpected new challenge arose, a challenge that would bring to light secrets from Benjamin's past that he had tried to forget. One day, while reviewing old documents, Clarice found a letter addressed to Benjamin. It was from someone named Rachel, a name she had never heard Benjamin mention. Clarice, hesitant, decided to hand the letter directly to him without opening it. When Benjamin saw the name on the letter, his face turned pale. Clarice noticed the immediate change in his expression. "Mr. Harrison, is everything okay?" Benjamin, still stunned, replied in a low voice. "Rachel is someone I thought I'd never hear from again." With trembling hands, he opened the letter and began to read. As his eyes scanned the words, a mix of emotions washed over him: pain, regret, and deep sadness. After a long silence, Benjamin explained, "Rachel was the great love of my life many years ago. We were young, idealistic, and dreamed of a future together. But I was so obsessed with my career and the idea of success that I left her behind. I thought I could have it all, but I ended up losing what was most important." Clarice listened in silence, understanding the weight that memory carried. "And what does she say in the letter?" Clarice asked gently. Benjamin took a deep breath before answering. "She's sick, terminally ill, and she wants to see me one last time. She says there's something she needs to tell me before she goes." The revelation left Benjamin shaken. He had buried the past, but now he was forced to confront it head-on. With the letter in his hands, he knew he had to make a choice: face his past mistakes or continue running from them. Benjamin couldn't sleep that night. Rachel's letter brought back memories he had buried deep. Memories of a time when he was younger, more idealistic, but also more ruthless in his pursuit of success. Rachel had been his anchor, the only person who saw beyond his ambitions and saw the man he could be. But he left her behind, convinced that success in business was more important than any relationship. Now, years later, Rachel was dying, and he felt a wave of guilt and regret he had never experienced before. Yet, mixed with these feelings was a curiosity about what Rachel needed to tell him. What could she reveal that was so important, even now, after all this time? The next day, Benjamin decided he couldn't put off the visit. Clarice encouraged him, knowing he needed to face this chapter of his life to truly move forward. "Go, Mr. Harrison. Face it. Sometimes we need to revisit the past to finally find peace in the present," she said, with the calm and wisdom that always accompanied her. Benjamin left for the small town where Rachel now lived, a simple and quiet place, very different from the busy life he had known. When he arrived at the modest hospital where she was staying, he felt a chill down his spine. It was the first time in many years that he felt truly vulnerable. As he entered the room, he saw Rachel lying in bed, visibly frail, but with a peaceful look. She smiled when she saw him, a smile that carried years of longing and understanding. "Ben, you came," she said, her voice soft and weak. "Rachel, I'm so sorry," was all Benjamin could say, overwhelmed with emotion. Rachel just shook her head, her gaze gentle. "There's no need for apologies. We both made our choices, and life took its course. But there's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago." Benjamin felt his heart race. "What is it, Rachel?" he asked, moving closer to the bed. She hesitated for a moment, as if gathering the strength to say what she needed to. "Ben, you have a daughter. Her name is Emily. I found out I was pregnant right after you left. I thought about telling you, but when I saw how involved you were with your business, I decided it would be better to raise Emily on my own." The revelation hit Benjamin like a blow. He stepped back, trying to process the information. He had a daughter he never knew existed. Where is she now?" he asked, his voice trembling. "She's in town, taking care of me. Emily is a good person, Ben. She inherited your determination, but she also has a big heart. She always wanted to meet her father, but I was afraid of how it would affect her. But now, with the little time I have left, I think it's time for you two to meet." Benjamin was stunned. The idea of having a daughter he had never known left him bewildered, but it also awakened a deep desire to know her, to make up for the lost time. Rachel called for Emily, and moments later, a young woman entered the room. She had Rachel's eyes, but Benjamin's intense gaze. When their eyes met, a heavy silence settled in the room. "Emily, this is your father," Rachel said, with a gentle smile. Emily seemed hesitant, but there was a genuine curiosity in her eyes. Benjamin, still in shock, took a step forward. "Emily, I don't know what to say. I never knew about you, and I deeply regret losing so much time. But I want to get to know you if you'll let me." Emily watched him for a long moment, trying to read the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, she nodded. "I want to get to know you too, Dad." Her words brought a deep sense of relief to Benjamin. For the first time in years, he felt a real connection, something that wasn't tied to business or wealth, but to the simple human desire to belong. In the days that followed, Benjamin spent all the time he could with Rachel and Emily. They talked about the past, about how Emily grew up, and what it meant for Benjamin to have a second chance to be part of her life. Rachel, though frail, seemed at peace seeing the connection forming between father and daughter. Before Rachel passed away, she made Benjamin promise that he would take care of Emily and continue to work to help others through the foundation. With tears in his eyes, he promised he would do so, not just for her, but for himself, as he finally understood the value of a life well lived. After Rachel's funeral, Benjamin and Emily returned to New York together. Although the pain of loss was intense, there was also a sense of renewal. Benjamin felt like he was starting a new life, this time with a more true and deep purpose. Emily quickly became involved with the Hope Foundation. With her talent for business and her passion for helping others, she became a key part of the organization. Working alongside her father and Clarice, she brought new ideas and renewed energy to the mission the foundation so strongly advocated. Clarice, who had been the guiding force for Benjamin throughout the process, became a mentor of sorts to Emily. The two developed a close relationship based on mutual respect and a shared understanding of life's challenges. Over time, the foundation grew exponentially. The mission to help those in need continued, but now with a greater focus on broken families and young people who needed guidance and support. Benjamin's story, of his fall and redemption, of how he found a new life by accepting his past and facing his mistakes, became an inspiration to many. Finally, on a quiet morning, Benjamin looked around the foundation's office. He saw Emily working alongside Clarice, volunteers busy with various tasks, and felt a peace he had never experienced before. He had lost a lot, but in the process, he had gained something infinitely more valuable: a true connection with the people around him, a genuine purpose, and most importantly, a family. The story of Benjamin, Clarice, and Emily was a testament to how, no matter how much life knocks us down, there is always a chance to get back up. And that sometimes the most important lessons come from those we least expect. Clarice, who was once invisible to Benjamin, had become his greatest source of wisdom and support. And now, with Emily by his side, he knew he could face any challenge the future might hold. What began as a story of loss and despair transformed into a story of hope, redemption, and love. And Benjamin Harrison, who once thought his life was over, discovered that true success was not in accumulating wealth, but in building something that truly mattered.